Okay. Hi, this is Lara Hocheiser on with Sara Casper from Comprehensive Consent. And I heard about Sara on the Kids Yoga podcast with Jess Mogis, who's a friend of mine. Jess
Mujis.
Mogis. And I was really interested in what Sara had to say because obviously this issue of consent and touch comes up a lot, as well as social emotional learning in the kids yoga world. So we've been wanting to catch up for a little while. And so this is Sara. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, how are you? I should also say it's pronounced Sara. You
Oh,
wouldn't have
Sara.
spelled Sarah pronounced Sara. It's a whole thing.
Oh,
But I
I'm
just
Lara, so we rhyme.
Lara.
Sara.
Oh my God. See, I would have said Lara.
Perfect.
This is a
And we are both in Brooklyn, but we
Mhm.
have so Lara kills Brooklynites because they want to call me Lara so desperately. And they must
It is
hate
that New
that
York.
you're
Mhm.
Sarah. They must want to call you Sarah with those
Sarah.
New York art.
I love it. I love it. Oh, that's so funny. Lara and Sarah. Perfect. Oh,
Yeah. So tell me, how did you end up on the Kids Yoga podcast? Does that have to do with some of the work or workshops you're up to? How did you end up there?
yeah, I ended up there because up until recently, what was a kids yoga page, because I'm a kids yoga teacher, is now a consent page. But it was, yeah, it was a kids yoga page because I'm a kids yoga teacher in New York City. I work for a couple of different studios and organizations. And in doing that, I really noticed this, what all kids yoga teachers know, which is it's not just about the poses. It's not just about tree pose and down dog and all of that. That's
Yeah.
well and good, but like the breathing and the tuning into the body, and the compassion for others, the loving kindness, all of that, really, uh, I really connected with it. And
Very
I have a
cool.
whole
Well, and
life
it's
path.
interesting. Oh, go.
Oh, I was gonna say I have a
Tell
whole
me about
life
it.
path, but like all the things interacted, and specifically kids yoga and acro yoga, which is for my own practice of like doing acrobatics and partnered acrobatics with adults, led me to be like, there's a way to teach kids these social emotional skills in a very clear way and give them consent conversation skills. And that's where I went and talked to Jessica Mujis about like a kids yoga teacher and kids consent teacher perspective on just raising good humans.
Oh, that's so awesome. Well, and I think about back to like as a tween myself, I would get that message from my brain that something was not right, and I would just override it with what I thought I was supposed to do. And I went into my older teens and young adult life people pleasing. And I think this is something that people that are socialized as women deal with more so and are burdened with. And I'm raising a child that I really want to have the freedom of. So my daughter, for example, does not want to hug most people upon seeing them. And I'm so comfortable with her no. I'm so comfortable with her intuition. I always compliment her like later on and say, I like how you put up these boundaries. She will just yell no. And it tends to be like at grandpas and uncles, and she's just naturally gravitated to women at the start of a hangout, but by the end, she will maybe give a hug. And to not put the emotional burden on her of like the disappointment of that grandparent that's just driven 6 hours, it's really difficult because inside myself, I feel like all of the guilt from that person's not like disappointment, but I still want to raise her to honor herself. So it's an interesting place for me to be as a like very sensitive person and wanting her to have freedom I don't, but still experiencing the inner turmoil of her saying no and like knowing why I could not have done that. It's very wild.
It's such a complicated and complex thing to do because it's not just one person. It's not like, how do I deal with anger when I'm alone in my room?
Right.
It's like there's
Family
always
dynamic.
then there's you consent
Totally.
doesn't exist without another person. And so you always are managing both your side of the interaction and theirs, and like where you have control and where you don't have control, and asking good questions and right and standing. And I'm sure your daughter is able to say no because you encourage her to, because for so
Right.
many kids that's an impossibly hard thing to do because they're told you have to.
Right. Well, we don't really have an obedience like household. I think that there are obviously positives, and I'm not, I think all parents can parent in their own way. And a lot of this is cultural. So I won't say it's good or bad, but that's just not how we run the show here. And so I tell her what I expect from her. I support her. Like, you know, if she's responsible for cleaning up after herself, I support her doing that by doing it with her. Most of the time, she's only 3.5. But there's no like, you will be in your room for an hour type of, it's not like a fear-based model, but I will say it does require an ongoing, it's really difficult because if I'm short on resources myself, I can feel myself like get short with her or have expectations that are not developmentally appropriate for her. Like she can clean up all of her toys and it's just, she can't yet, but I want like our family whole culture has been around getting her to understand that she's a part of the family responsibility. And so, but there is some consent involved in that because if she will not consent to being part of the family community and like helping clean up, then it becomes this war of like, okay, do we get to discipline you to death? Like, how do we, interestingly, inside our own home, it always comes back to routine and practice. And I saw on your website a lot about practice in non-crisis moments. This is one of the hills I will die on is practice in non-crisis moments. So day to day, it's just, we practice, talking about what the expectation will be, modeling it when she's done it well, complimenting it, and when she hasn't, pointing it out. But like getting her to actually consent to this process is very difficult. And it's an ongoing dialogue.
Interesting. Of course, we live in Brooklyn, so there's a truck driving by my window. We'll just ignore that. So interesting, because I typically use the word consent only when I talk about touch. But in your household, it's for like any interaction with a human, whether it's based or not.
Well, my spouse will say like, do I have consent to have this conversation? Usually if it's around scheduling or other things that cause strife or anxiety, we actually learn this in therapy to ask for consent for hard conversations. So it's not always touch related in our use of it at home, but it doesn't mean that we are using it correctly. But we do lean on consent for difficult things. So of course it is touch related, but it's also beyond that to anything that will be difficult and negotiated between more than one party.
Yeah, I think, and it's so funny because I don't use the word consent, but for things like, can I have this difficult conversation? But I will encourage parents to use the same skills of like asking before you have the conversation.
Right.
So
Not surprising.
I don't typically use the word, but it is the same. It is the same thing. I just, because
permission, maybe you use permission.
Yeah, permission, or like, is now a good time for this conversation? Or like, I want to have this conversation. Are you ready? It's the same kind of skill and waiting for that yes before you just jump right into it.
And that's a mindful listening
same thing, different name.
Yeah, well, and that's that permission or that waiting at giving the information that this is something you'd like to do is part of mindful listening skills as well. It's like, this is the thing I'd like to talk about. And it's also sometimes good to give information on how you'd like it to go. Like, should it be a back and forth, or do you just want to be heard? Do you want to be heard and responded to? So we like go very deep into these communication topics. And I think we fall in and out of like right now we're really lacking mindful listening at our house. And I can tell because the harmony is reduced when that happens, because it takes so much energy to quietly listen to somebody and not interject. It's like,
yep. I am waiting my turn. And also to not be like, let me prepare ahead of time why they're wrong and why I'm right.
Well, and back to consent with children, I remember being 11 and just thinking so hard and loudly about every little thing. It would have been nearly impossible for me to conduct a consent conversation without like being stuck. So it must take a lot. This is the thing, is like when someone brings you in for a workshop and they think it's one and done. I cannot imagine that would possibly land in a single session, which is exactly how it works. Like when people have me come in and do like a school-wide mindfulness assembly or something. And I'm like, okay, but then you need follow-up for skill development. So I'm picturing you come in and do this amazing workshop and somebody learns one single skill that they can apply forever, but the rest of it really needs time and space and hypothetical situations and role play and things of that nature. And to get over that initial discomfort, like doing a yoga pose for the first time, is going into these types of conversations. So what's your process like? Is it something that does like a lot of repetition, almost like a yoga practice where you're coming back to the conversations, or is it a curriculum?
So it's funny because I did some like piloting before COVID hit. And in that it was one student workshop and one parent workshop. And that was in February. So really like right before. And then it was like, well, I'm not going to continue this pilot. And instead now, and which I actually was okay with because I needed to figure out a way to do exactly what you're saying, which was I can get schools to bring me in for a 2-hour workshop. That's no problem. I have to work on a clear path, whether it's either trainer and teachers are then teaching their students, or whether it's I'm coming to multiple sessions of what you're learning, how it's going to go, and like this is only
course objectives, learning objectives.
Exactly.
And it sounds like you could use a little like backwards planning. That's actually all the stuff we cover in my, like I have a course on business, like the business of kids yoga, which is all about like how you write proposals and like, you know, and then yoga in schools, which is all about what you say to get somebody to sign up for a series versus a one-off. And the hard part is selling it without that backwards planning piece. So my recommendation would be look at the ultimate skills you want them to have and plan backwards. What type of assessment, what type of activities would lead to them learning each of these specific skills. And then you can write the curriculum from that place. And you can propose it would take 4 or 6, you know, and then since it's virtual, I bet you'd get more bites than normal because they can just like the parent can log in or not. Like it's less of a you know, because I know with consent it would probably be just like yoga where most people would be thrilled and a few people would be extremely like would object so hard to that. So I feel that doing it online could be a great way for the schools to say, if you're not into this, like, skip.
And I only want people who are into it because it requires parent and teacher reinforcement. So like if you're just gonna like be like, I'll take a listen, but I don't plan on taking any action. Well, maybe I can convince you to take some action, but if you're still not going to, like, you know.
Well, there is something about exposure too, because you know, like I listen to a lot of political podcasts, and it's very hard to get somebody to believe the opposite view by just telling them how wrong they are. But by listening to people's life experiences, people can soften and start to allow things to be possible that they believe were the opposite. Like, so, you know, if someone does not believe in consent culture and that these conversations are important and just that a woman has this role and a man has this role and this is a, you know, and these really defined and what is the word? Binary ideas, but rather that there is a nuance and a level of communication required, perhaps just by being exposed to your so if you use storytelling at all, which I use a lot of storytelling in my courses where I'm teaching teachers, and I think, and with my students, children as well, but I always use storytelling because I think that's a great way to demonstrate or give that like hypothetical situation that they could start to project that they might run into. And then it's like, oh, just because this wasn't your experience doesn't mean people don't have this experience.
And also gamifying, which we talked about a little bit before we jumped on the live. But like, if so, at the very least, parents, even if you don't believe in this is a fun way to have fun with your child. And by the way, your child's gonna learn something along the way.
Right. Like, protect them from assault or very unhappy experiences that they even agreed to, and then change their mind about later.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really it's communication skills in general. It's yeah. I'm thinking back to your when you were talking about your 11-year-old self and how you would have had to struggle because you would have just wanted to keep talking.
Right. I would have been so nervous about what I was supposed to say.
Oh, interesting.
I think I would have, like, you know, when someone's talking and you need to listen to take in what they say, I think I would have been so stuck in what I had to rehearse that it would have been impossible for me to comfortably learn in one session. I think I would have needed 6 or 7 or 8 truly to get it through. And I remember the best class was drama because we always acted everything out and did a lot of like improv and silly sounds. And I think I can see how games would work in consent conversations around like partner pose and kids yoga, because they get to be silly and have fun while they're practicing learning the skills. And that can really help drop that feeling of like, I'm not going to learn this, that like, this is not for me, or this is awkward. It's like they're having fun and then they can give it a shot.
Yep, absolutely. That's how the learning happens, by true engagement. And so if you add a little game in there, great.
So what would a game be like?
Oh,
just one example.
Yeah, I'm like, which one? Okay, so this is one of my favorite ones because it involves chocolate. Right, yeah, exactly. I'm like, this is the one I'll say. So we really want to have, and this is great for honestly probably someone like 8 years old and up, where one side of the room has a piece of chocolate, the other side doesn't, and one side is partnered up with someone from the other side. They go over with the chocolate and they say, here's a chocolate. And then the person is told, they're supposed to say like, great, thanks. And then the person with the chocolate says, can I give you a hug now? And the person who just received the chocolate is instructed to say no. So they're supposed to turn down someone after they just gave them something.
Oh.
And it is.
I can feel myself squirming.
Even with just like a Hershey kiss, and even with knowing that this is the rule of the game, they're not actually saying no to you, but I mean, they were told to. It's not coming from within. It is still so hard, so uncomfortable. And it's such an amazing way because children are laughing because they're uncomfortable. There's chocolate and they get to keep the chocolate. And they're experiencing for themselves that saying no is hard. And now all of a sudden they're engaged in the learning because you have to get them to buy into the idea. They're like, I say no all day. I say no to my teacher. I say no to my mom. I say no to my like soccer coach. I say no to everyone. Don't tell me saying no is hard. And I'm like, oh,
the thing about your peers is harder because and like all the time. Oh, my battery's low, but I thought it was plugged in. Okay, let's see. Is charging in? 1 second. I'm so sorry. Let's check if I'm plugged in. Whoops. Battery. Okay, I am officially plugged in.
Good.
Update.
Save. Yeah. Yes, no peers.
Yeah, but just in terms of, you were saying, for 8 and up, but also starting around 9 or 10, the peer group after 3rd grade, really, the peer group becomes more. And I don't want to tell parents or teachers you're not important. You're very, very important. You continue to be as important as peers through the end of middle school, where the peer group becomes the most important relationships to these children in terms of who they're influenced by and whatnot. So feeling the acceptance of your peers feels so important and big that listening to yourself becomes very difficult. And then it's like balancing act between how badly do I not want this versus how badly do I think I need to do this? Or, and then that's where the negotiation skills come in, because maybe it's a soft maybe, or it's a hard no, or it's an enthusiastic yes, or somewhere in the middle. So I think like that for me, it's like get back to the mind body connection where you can sit and feel what you truly feel about this, and then how important that decision is to you. So you feel this way, and how important it is to you that you also then make that decision. Like, because sometimes I'll feel something as my preference, but I will compromise anyways because it might be the best for the group, more of like a utilitarian decision where it's the least harm and most benefit versus when do I protect myself? And I think that is a really interesting thing when it comes to touch or any kind of interaction with kids, because I learned about utilitarianism and these in philosophy in college, as a young adult. So how does someone without that knowledge and experience learn to weigh? And also, I'm not weighing that in real time when I'm under pressure of my peers. So it's kind of a lot of information, but then how do they learn to make those decisions? Is it just the information from their body? Or, how do you get them to think about that?
So that's where when I said like everything from my past lives has combined, like that's where every mindfulness is part of consent. Like listening to your body. So when I teach, there's always a like significant mindfulness component. So I think it's the merge of knowing how to tune into the body and then having the skills to say yes, no, or maybe. And maybe is only a good answer if it's followed, if it's not a maybe replacing a no. If it's a maybe, let me have 5 minutes to decide,
Maybe you
great
can do it,
answer,
like,
amazing answer. If it's maybe because you don't know how to say no,
right.
then that's, so it's giving kids the empowerment and also teaching on the other side. It's not just the person who's deciding yes, no, or maybe, it's how is the person who asked responding. And if you teach kids that only up to the like no means no, but then what are they doing after they get the no? Are they saying, oh, you're such a loser,
Right.
that person's never going to say no again? Or are they being like,
People laughing when you say no because you're uncomfortable and they think you're kidding, and like all these things that are
okay.
nonverbal, or yeah.
And that's where all the skills come in, and then like, and also tune into your body, and that merging is where you make decisions. And sometimes you're going to make ones that you're like, oh, I kind of wish I did it differently. But
Right.
then you have a support. If you're learning consent and your teachers are talking about consent, or your yoga teachers talking about consent, you now have a place to bring that up.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like back to my childhood, some of my friends that were more likely to say no and miss out on important experiences, because I think the skill of mindfulness they were lacking was noticing the doubt, but putting a space between that and the decision. And even though they noticed the doubt or they weren't sure, that they had the skills to explore why they were feeling doubt or unsure. Because I remember having friends that regretted. I was like a yes to most things type of kid. Um, and I remember knowing people that were very regretful of things they did not participate in after the fact. And so learning that skill of like, once you notice a negative or difficult emotion around something, to be able to investigate, right? So like the reign of self-compassion, where you can actually investigate and nurture that part of you. Well, is it just because you've never done it before that you're uncomfortable? Is it a body image issue? Is it truly something you want to miss out on? Like in some of the partner yoga, I have taken out most of the partner yoga poses that would cause obvious body image issues, because I've seen them in, play out.
Yeah.
Like the lizard on a rock. I don't want someone to be, unless it's parent child, I completely remove that from any of my teachings. And I always have my teachers remove that, because like there's a power dynamic of someone having somebody else on their body. And, if the person on top is bigger, like I just saw so many body image issues come up in those. And even like the double dog, where it's like, so I actually don't teach those, or
I
none
want
of
to come
my,
back to it. Continue going. I'm marking it because I want to come back to it. But
yeah, but it's like, these are things I've actually had them take out, because I didn't feel there was always enough time and space to give the consent a language, and the body, like the body image issues, all of it coming up into play. So unless you have the ability to create a safe container for all of that, and you're just going to do 5 minutes of partner poses, choose the ones when nobody's weight is on anybody else. And then if you do have the container and the time and space, perhaps you can do ones, and I'll do like back-to-back breathing, where someone will then lean and the other person, like no one's on top, but
right.
they're leaning their weight, and it is different. There isn't a power dynamic, and there's communication.
Yeah, that is different.
So I do still and I still, partner twist, where someone has their hand on your leg, and but like these are things, if you don't want to do it, you can do it on your own or use the wall. And so there's always an opt out in my, at least when I do trainings, and even in my Foundations of Kids Yoga, which is the basic course that I teach, I emphasize that, and we spend time talking about that, because people have pressure as kids yoga teachers to include partner poses, because kids have seen them on Instagram, right? And now they know, they have awareness that this is the thing. So in the absence of something like your training, or someone like me that has enough experience to facilitate something safely, how do they do it? So I just say don't, or pick these 5 poses, which are going to be the ones that I was supposed to release a partner pose consent language, like a lesson plan unit for teachers. It's all illustrated and everything, but I decided not to release it because of COVID. I thought it would be kind of rude to be like, here's the thing, and you don't touch anyone for the next indefinite amount of time. But eventually we will be releasing that product, which is telling kids yoga teachers or others that facilitate children's yoga experiences, how to do games around consent with kids, so that they have practice saying yes, no, and maybe with negotiation, so that they can get, poses where they can do partner poses with contact, and not feel like they have to, or they're missing out, but they're really making a decision from their own needs and desires, rather than.
How does that look? Like what is something that game, or that it's a lesson plan?
It's a lesson plan, and there's games as part of it. Basically, it starts with a blog talking about like the nuances of consent, and how it's peer group and all these things we've kind of talked about. And then I give 5 yoga poses that are partner poses for kids to do in pairs, all of which there's no like power dynamic as we're talking about, or person on top of the other. And then before they are even doing these poses, they're showing the solo option. So if it's going to be back-to-back breathing, they'll say you can breathe on your mat or if you're back against the wall. And then finally, before they play, there's like a consent game where the kids go back and forth asking silly questions, and they practice saying yes, no, or maybe. And if it's a maybe, they have to say what are the contingencies. So
Yeah.
can I have a pizza party on your yoga mat? Maybe if you buy the pizza. Like, so these kinds of silly games. So I'm hoping to release that when more of the world is COVID free. Anyways, but that is when I saw your interview with Jess, I was like, oh my gosh, you're doing the thing that is so near and dear to my heart, because that's exactly the world I'm in and I care so much about it.
It's so fun. That's totally aligned with what I do. And I love that like silliness, right? Like, can I have a pizza party on your mat is like, what? Like, that doesn't really happen, but like, that's like, I mean, you heard my podcast, so you heard me say like, you can pick your friends, you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your friend's nose unless you ask first.
Right. Unless
like,
you ask.
I don't think anyone is going to say yes. I'm not letting any of my friends pick my nose, but like, you asked, and like, I can say no, right? Or I can say maybe, are you wearing gloves? Or like, whatever it is. I love that. That's so, I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Cool. I never thought about the power dynamic thing or I have, but in a very different way, where as an acro yogi and a flyer and a base, which means that I am both the holding the person up and being held up. So if we're talking about power, I in both of those positions. And for me, that did wonders for body image, because I was like, once I know the skills, I can do all of it. And it doesn't have to matter that I'm not like a teeny mini flyer, which a lot of acro yogis are.
Oh yeah.
And so for me,
yoga workshops.
Sorry?
I've been to some acro yoga workshops, and as a solid medium person, I have felt, but I also have like some hip issues. So flying doesn't really feel good in my body because I have like hypermobility. So it's very difficult for me to actually fly safely. So I'm sorry, base safely. So I'm usually a flyer, but I'm also not tiny. And so it's definitely caused like some body image issues. Like, oh no, I'm so flexible and there's something wrong with me and I can't like be strong enough and I'm too big to be a flyer, but I can't, I definitely think that I could see how it would break them down, and also how like my own limitations, I had to really challenge those beliefs and just recognize this is what my body is okay with right now. And that is also a consent issue, because I don't have to base just because it's my turn.
Yep. And right. And if I want to, maybe I can find someone who it would work for my comfort level.
Right.
So it's like
I can base my daughter,
right.
But I can base somebody that is a similar weight to me because it's difficult for me.
Right. And it doesn't matter whether it's difficult because of a hip thing or because you just don't want to. I mean, that's what I do like about those power poses, but I do agree that it has to really be introduced sensitively, because otherwise you have someone like me who believed I could only be a base because of like my broad shoulders and my wide hips, feeling insecure when it's my turn to fly. But also having encouragement for that, if you do want to fly, even as a bigger person, how can you navigate that?
Right, like choosing the right partner.
Yeah. So I have to think about when I get back into teaching, if I will teach a little bit. When I get back into teaching kids yoga, thinking about those partner poses where there is someone who's like off the floor, or someone where there's a power and like someone's over them.
Right.
How that looks.
It'd be interesting to do a workshop together at a school where you could do the facilitation around the yes and no maybe type games for consent, and I could choose the poses, and that could be a really fun type of workshop with SEL and movement and the whole deal for but of course I think in reality that would be 2021 2022 academic year, because no one's allowed to touch this year. And so it's an interesting time to have this conversation, because now we know that anybody who's touching anybody, it's going to be more of an intimacy thing, because we'll have smaller classes or pods, or you're only allowed to hang out with your best friend, or it's just you and your family. And so it's even more important because we have just a few people in our circles right now, and we need those relationships to be healthy. And we need to know how to get our needs. Like my daughter, every single night say, "Mommy, will you tickle me?" Like she every day, that she needs the physical touch. Like, and so she's really good at asking for what she needs. She's a little demanding, and sometimes I'm like, "I just tickled you for 20 minutes, so mommy says no now." But you know, like I think of like 8, 9-year-olds home with their parents who maybe don't have siblings, and they're not getting the physical touch they might need, and learning to go up and just say, "Hey, I need a hug," to a parent, or I have to have a play date with a friend. Can we find somebody to like open up our quarantine a little bit with? Because I think even though children are children, they still really do need some physical touch.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, there's research on research to support the like the
Hugs
healthy development, just like physically, emotionally, all of it for needing touch. Yeah. And that's why I also love doing this. I love having a role in this work, because I also think that it's really easy with what's been going on with consent and touch in the last like 3 years, like with the Me Too movement. I
yeah.
think touch can feel scary and
Yeah.
you don't want to do anything wrong. And that is a good perspective to come from. But also, it's not just like you don't want to do anything wrong. It's like, how can I do right? Like, how can I make a person feel good with the kind of touch that they want?
Well, and to shut down the possibility of experiences because you are so afraid to mess up that you delay development.
Yep.
And I think we need to find somewhere in the middle where we are asking for the experiences we want with our words clearly,
Mm-hmm.
and receiving a clear yes, and then doing the partner pose, or then doing the hug, or then, you know, flying. And I think that like in my acro yoga experience, everyone's aware of what's happening and when, because there's a verbal like language around it, which I think in the yoga world, like, you know, there's been a big uproar over like hands-on assists.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't give people hands-on assists in my classes, and I never really have. I tried to as a new teacher, and I realized why it was inappropriate, because I'm not a body worker. And I have done like 100 hours of anatomy training since then, and I feel less and less and less qualified the more I know. So first of all, touching somebody in an unspoken way in a public class is problematic. And so when people come to me and they say, "Hey, I want to do kids yoga, the kid's doing the pose wrong, what do I do? Where should I touch him?" And I'm like, the main thing I'll say is, if at all possible, use visuals if they can see, if it's somebody who has vision, right? And if they don't, maybe you can do a tapping in like the least offensive place with permission. But really, truly, I go and readjust the only bodies I'm touching are the people that are 1 and under in my baby yoga. And that's like with its whole version of consent, which I'm happy to talk more about, like baby consent and what that looks like. And in my early childhood groups, they're always coming to me. They want hugs and things like that. But being very beyond that, I'm not fixing someone's downward dog, and I de-emphasize the form of the poses. And if anything, I have all of the illustrations I've had developed are in-house, because I wanted kids to see themselves in the poses, or use a mirror, right? Like I do not have to touch your body to show you what this looks like, or to show you how you've maybe gotten confused. Half the time, like here's a great example for kids yoga teachers listening. You teach a toddler to do cat and cow, and they'll do upward dog and downward dog most of the time. Who cares? It's a back bend, it's a spinal extension and flexion. It's great. If you really care, hey, where are your knees? Okay, put your knees on the ground and try that again. It is not required for you to go and lift their hips up or put their, you know,
Who's to say, like you were talking about your extra flexy hips, your hyperextension in your hips. So like, who's to say that that kid doesn't have something, and now you're fixing their body? That's like very presumptuous. Not like, gotta ask. Yep. As someone who also has injuries, I'm like, don't touch me.
Here's the issue. I'm your teacher and you're 7, and I ask you if I can do something. you think you must say yes.
Yeah.
Because I have, this is the power differential again. So in my trainings, I feel like a broken record because I say this probably 3 or 4 times with every cohort. We do not ask unless it's absolutely necessary because they feel like they must say yes. And when we develop very close relationships with kids that are one-on-one, and maybe it's like, perhaps you can have the type of advanced communication where maybe you could help them extend into a pose in some way. In general, and that's the very rare case, right? In general, if you have a group yoga and it's many people, I would say absolutely don't touch their bodies to put them in the pose. And I think some people feel disappointed by that because they were brought up in a lineage with a lot of hands-on assist. But children's yoga has to be different than adult yoga, and adult yoga is going through a reckoning right now. Me too. All the gurus who've done the bad touch type of stuff, and now we need to take a big step back and recognize the harm that has been done, and pause and figure out, why do we need to touch a student, and if it is absolutely necessary, then how do we go about doing that? I cannot think of very many instances that we would need to touch a student in a kids yoga class. I can't really think of any.
Nope. None.
Yeah.
I think, no, the only time I will is if they're trying something like a headless headstand, if any teachers know what this is, like when they're doing an inversion. I will always, when I introduce it, I will say, and I can, if you want to try it but don't feel comfortable, I can like hold your leg if you want. So I'm not directly asking, can I hold your leg right now?
Right.
But I will preface that. And I think that kind of thing, I would love to hear your opinion on this, but I think that kind of thing can be okay. So it's for the whole class if you do or you don't want it from the get-go. And it's a clear reason why I'm touching. It's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because otherwise you're not going to get upside down.
Well, I'm going to say something that might be annoying, but
Great.
I do not teach those like kick up handstands to children because they do them poorly. They don't have the musculature. And because, so the way like, basically the way that anatomical development happens in a child is they're not necessarily going to have the core strength to back up the like length of their limbs. And so if you put pressure on joints, the growth plates are around the joint. So knees, elbows, wrists. I'm very unlikely to cue something that they can't do. Like, so I always say like, I don't cue any fancy poses. And the reason being
I don't
because
have any
fancy poses. I don't teach fancy poses. I don't trust that the kids have, and I've seen this because they have terrible form doing this. You know, occasionally a gymnast will come in and have the form, but first of all, I don't teach what I don't know, and I can't do handstands. And second of all, I know that it's very, very rare that there will be any injuries in children's yoga. And I have taught over 9,000 hours. I calculated last year, no injuries in any of my classes yet. And I used to do all the stuff, like the kicking up the wall and all the fancy stuff. And what I will say is, in the past like 3 or 4 years, I would do something where I would show dolphin, and then I would show them how to come into a Shirshasana headstand in my early childhood classes. I'm talking kids 3 and under. And then they would want to try it, and they would put their hands down, and I would flip up by their hips. But they're all coming at me, wanting to do it. Yeah. And they're asking me to do it. And I would show them on my little stuffed animal, and I'd say, this is something I can do with you. And then they would just line up, and I would know who wanted to try it. And they would line up over and over if they were excited about it. Yeah. I tend to do that less now. But like I said, I have much more comfort with touch in early childhood because they're pre-COVID, right? Because I think that there's just, you walk into a daycare or a preschool, there has to be touch between the kid and the child for the child to feel calm and safe. And so to be like, don't touch me, don't come near me in a yoga space feels inappropriate. But the touch has to be for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is always when they have blocks under their shoulders. So it's not pressure in the wrist because I don't do kick up to the handstands.
Okay. Oh yeah. So it's the like, shape of a, yeah, it's the shape of
they have their head kind of like floating and their shoulders are, but even that, like, how often am I teaching that? Not, because when do you need to really touch a child who's 5 and up?
Yeah. And so I'll also say in some cases there is a good reason to touch. So in my early childhood classes, where we're doing a relaxation, I have seen like a lot of my colleagues go around and touch the kids' feet and the kids really want to do it. And they're like, they'll have a signal, like they'll put a hand on their belly or they'll have a scarf they can hold up if they want you to wiggle their feet. And they look forward to that so much. So I had taken it completely out. I had gone kind of pendulum swung all the way where I was like, no touch, no touch. And then when I had some of my teaching staff came in and taught for me, and I was observing them. Mm-hmm. And I recognized how much the kids look forward to these sections of their classes. And the touch wasn't in any inappropriate part of the body. There was a signal for, I want this. And then there was still a verbal reconfirmation. So they would practice the signal, they would get the verbal confirmation, and it was a very unoffensive touch. It was like wiggling the feet to set the sacrum flat. And I found that to be, okay, so I made an exception there. And then another exception is if I'm teaching a 4-year-old and they come sit in my lap, I might have them sit next to me. But if it's a 2-year-old, like they need a minute in my lap. In, like this is of course pre-COVID. I think now that it's COVID, I'm doing virtual only policy for myself and my teaching team. But it seems hard to communicate to a 2-year-old. Like it almost feels like a rejection that would be difficult to justify rather than take a moment, unless I really don't want it and I can say, please sit next to me. But if I don't mind it and I feel like it's going to help that person calm and be safe in my class, I'm going to let that 2-year-old sit in my lap. That's a baby and they deserve to have that, you know, only a year ago they were still breastfeeding, and, you know, like just being near somebody's heart and having that rhythm, I find that that's really important. So it was hard for me to say a strict no, but now I'm very selective about the touch. But I do not touch kids that like, so I went into a high school to do a residency in Brooklyn a few years ago, and the lead teacher would touch their feet and wiggle their feet in Shavasana. These were seniors, right? They're like 150-pound people. Like, so when I went in, I felt like I was supposed to do that. And I touched one girl's feet and I was like, you know what? And I just said out loud, I was like, I don't think there's time for me to do this for everyone. So I'm going to opt out. That was how I said it. I didn't want to make the other teacher feel like she did something wrong, but I felt extremely uncomfortable. These were strangers to me and these were her girls and they had developed rapport I had not developed with them. Yeah. So for me to go in and touch their feet and legs, and they were dancers wearing ballet attire in my yoga class. So it's even more reason for me to not touch their legs and move their legs around and maybe expose parts of their body that they shouldn't have anyone else exposing but themselves.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
That resonates with me for sure. I hear more honking outside. I hope you guys don't.
This has been so fun. So I want to take a moment just to have you let us know how people can reach you and find you, if there's anything you want to promote. And I also would really look forward to when the world is a thing again. Sounds like we could do some really cool assemblies together. So it's great to know you're local, because I found that doing assemblies by myself has been really difficult. And a lot of my local team members are not as verbose as one might need to be leading an assembly. So
I got verbose down. Yeah, I got verbose down. Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this platform to share my work. So I am at Comprehensive Consent on Instagram and on Facebook. Wow, these sirens. I don't know if yours honks. Great. At Comprehensive Consent on Instagram, on Facebook, spelled Comprehensive Consent. And then comprehensiveconsent.com for my workshops, to sign up for my newsletter. You'll get some freebies along if you're on my newsletter list. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Those are the big. I have a boundary setting boot camp coming out for parents of kids ages 6 to 12. So be on the lookout for that. Sorry?
Is that posted yet? When is that?
That there's information posted, but pre-sale hasn't happened yet. That is hopefully going to be live by the first week of September. That is the plan.
We'll definitely share it on the Flow and Grow platform. And in case, I'm assuming most people know because you're watching my channel, but I'm the founder of Flow and Grow Kids Yoga. And I am about to start a free offering called Self-Care Saturday. Myself and my team have been working very hard on it. And it's a free email newsletter that will come with videos and downloads. And really, truly what it is, I've seen in myself and all of the people I'm training, this breakdown of how we take care of ourselves. We don't know anymore because everything has changed. And there's no boundary between home and work. And there's so much uncertainty. So we're all feeling like, what do we do? And I think we start again. So the offering is completely free. I'm going to have a link for that on Wednesday in my newsletter. So please sign up for my newsletter. It's going to be its own separate newsletter, though. So if you're already registered, signed up for my newsletter, the Self-Care Saturday will be once a week, every Saturday starting in September. And we'll send you videos about how to tap into the joy and presence of everyday living and recreate your self-care. So whether you are a parent, a teacher, or anybody that loves kids, it's for you as the grown-up and for the children. And I'm painstakingly going through creating these videos, and it's a lot. So I want you to know, like, it is a labor of love, and it's been a lot of work, and I'm really hoping it comes together well. And the more people that sign up, the better. So Sarah, I'll send this to you when it comes out. I'm going to ask everybody to sign up for this thing, because if I did all this work and 100 people got it, great. But if 5,000 people got it, that's even better. And the other thing I want to plug is the fall 95-hour teacher training, which I'll be leading. We talk a lot about consent. Maybe I'll have you on to talk during the foundations course. And so it's a 95-hour, it's completely online, where I'm a registered yoga, children's yoga school. So you can get your, certification. You can register with Yoga Alliance. And currently I'm in the summer cohort. There's still some modules that you can sign up for. So Mindful Beginnings, which is how to do yoga with kids 0 to 5, starts Thursday. I've still got the business course. So you can either take individual courses or the whole thing. Love to have more people, because it's really going to be the wave of the future. We can't go into schools right now. Like, there's no enrichment. So pods need you. Online teaching, we need people. Like, I think people think that because we're not going into schools, like, how is this industry going to prevail? There's absolutely going to be a wider need within your own community for smaller groups of kids that are not going to have 5 days a week of school. So do not be afraid. The kids yoga industry will still happen. It's just going to look different. And I want to help everybody figure out how to do that and survive, because that's what I've spent the last 5 months doing. So Sara, Lara, we love you today. And hopefully we can do something live in Brooklyn someday too.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much. You do amazing work, and I'm really honored to be here. So thanks.
Oh, me too. That's why I cyber stalked you.
Love it. Like, for anyone else who wants to cyber stalk either of us, you can, I guess. I don't know. I'm going off and
Perfect.
I'm about to start a conversation about cyber stuff and consent, and we just don't have the time for that today. That's another conversation.
Part 2, and I'd be happy to come on again in maybe a month or 2 and talk about how things are evolving, especially when your workshop is live. I'm happy to have you back on to talk about it, and maybe get some people in the Flow and Grow community signed up.
That sounds great. And vice versa. I think you'd be a real value to what comprehensive consent does.
Thank you.
Thank
Talk
you.
to you soon. Bye.
Bye.